What's up, gangsters? Back at the Tamiya 1/48 scale Spitfire fundamentals build, and it is finally, after lots of ballyhoo, time to get down to doing those washes. But, you knew there was going to be a but, right? Yeah. First, I want to take care of some questions that have been collecting, because I hope this will be a somewhat shorter episode. And so I think I've got time, and these are good questions. And two of them come from Darren Cook, who I've mentioned before, who also runs the Grumpy Old Scale Modeler channel. And I don't know why. He doesn't seem grumpy to me at all, but at any rate, it's a good channel, and he has good content. And he has asked me two things. One, what is a wet palette? Okay, so got one right here that I can show you. I had to blow the dust off of it because, as I've said, I just don't use it. And it's mostly because I'm lazy. They really work great, and you can see that I was using it. So what this thing is basically a plastic dish that has a sponge in the bottom of it, like this, and then it's got this piece of parchment paper on top of the sponge. So what you do is you soak the sponge, put the parchment paper in there, and then you've got this humid environment that will help keep your acrylic paints wet and fresh. The parchment paper lets you put water on it if you're using that as a thinning agent. And then once you put the lid on, then you've got that moist air trapped in there, and allegedly it'll keep your acrylics soft for a long time. I've never really tested that theory. I live in a really dry environment, and even with the lid on, it's going to dry out eventually. But you know, I think most of the serious figure painters who are using acrylics really like these for good reason. Again, I'm just too lazy. When I'm just doing a couple of little details, I don't want to set this thing up because I got to carry it over, put water in it, and yeah, I know. Yeah, it is what it is. And I always think I'm going to get away without needing to do it, and as I've demonstrated, I almost never do. But at any rate, that's what it is. You can make one using a Tupperware dish and a sponge and some parchment paper yourself without having to go and buy one. While I was digging it out, I had to take this pack of Post-it notes off the top of it, and these are one of my favorite things at my workbench. I use Post-it notes all the time because they make a great little quick mask or paint shield that has really low-tack adhesive on it, so you don't have to worry about it ripping paint off or anything like that. It's just a great little thing to have handy near your paint booth. And speaking of similar things, I'm going to show you another type of Post-it note that I also just learned about, which is my new favorite thing. These are not strictly Post-it notes, but they work the same way. These are called dental mixing pads, and you may not be able to tell, but it's got a glossy surface. It looks like Post-its, but it's got a glossy surface on it that's basically impervious to chemicals. And so what you can do is you can mix up, little bits of paint, use, super glue, epoxy, whatever, and then just rip the top sheet off and throw it away. Fantastic. A guy named Mark Casiglia in Scale Modelers Critique Group, who is an Australian dentist and a super good guy and a very good model maker, introduced us to those things, and they're not expensive. So anyway, very cool. Okay, getting off track. Darren's other question was, would using heat to apply that instrument panel decal have made a difference? Maybe. So I've got a video about doing decals, and I used hot water and kind of did a comparison. And my conclusion was that, yeah, hot water will help the decal soften and conform to the surface a little bit better, but if you're going to be using a decal setting solution anyway, it's kind of a belt and suspenders sort of situation. And so, again, because I'm lazy and don't really feel like that there's any advantage, I'm not going to, go get some hot water just for something like that instrument panel decal. Now, I was on the verge of getting out the hairdryer because, that's a pretty quick and easy way to get some sustained heat on a decal. And I kind of feel like that maybe that's a little bit better because, again, it's sustained heat, whereas if you just dip a decal in hot water and take it out, it's going to cool off pretty quickly, and the advantage is not going to last for very long. So again, hot water is one of those things. I'm not going to say don't do it. Some people feel like it's a must. I don't think it's a must, but again, that's kind of one of those personal things where if you feel like it helps you, by all means, get after it. Okay, other questions. Somebody asked about scalpel handles. I get these on Amazon, and they're super cheap. They're like $5. And I think what the deal is these also are a dental tool or maybe a veterinary tool. They're not like the, expensive medical grade Swan and Morton or Bard Parker stainless steel scalpel handles, which I don't like anyway because they're small and they're flat. And with my hands being the way they are, I need a little bit more meat to get good control. So I really love these because they are bigger and just a little bit better for me ergonomically, and you can get them in different sizes. This is a number number 5, which you need for the smaller type blades, and this is a number 4. So that's those. Okay, then somebody asked me about my little cutting board, and I love that question because this is one of my favorite things. I know I get accused of being opinionated sometimes, and I am, but facts are facts, and I think using glass as a cutting board is super dumb because what better way to dull your nice brand new sharp scalpel blade than by rubbing it across a ceramic. So this little thing is my cutting board. This is a piece of ultra high molecular weight polyethylene. I know that's a mouthful, but basically this is just the super dense and tough version of the same kind of plastic that is used to make, like those flexible lids that come on some food containers. A lot of times, like if you've got a blow molded gas jug, chances are it's low density polyethylene. It's super flexible. This is just the, more alpha plastic version of the same stuff. And I got this little 4-inch coupon of it as a sample from a plastic supplier. I just wrote them an email, said, hey, I need a sample. Do you have any coupons? And they were like, yeah, they're 1/4 inch thick by 4 inches by 4 inches. Will that work? Perfect. But you don't have to go to that much trouble. You can go down to your local department store and get a cutting board. If it's white, chances are that that's what it's made out of. Some people think that those are made out of Teflon. And I think that is mostly not true because Teflon has issues with being food grade. At least that's what, there are claims to that effect. And ultra high molecular weight polyethylene does not. It's basically the plastic that gets used in all food grade machinery where any kind of abrasion or bearing surface is required because it's inert, non-reactive, and it wears really well. So, perfect for cutting boards. Okay. All right, here's another question. Can I mask the instrument panel gauges with liquid mask? Okay, so that's a really good question, and the answer is maybe. And I would refer the guy who asked that question and anybody else who's curious to the video I did where I tested some different masking fluids because there's basically 2 different kinds. There's the real stretchy sort of latex-based stuff, and I absolutely do not recommend that because the problem is that when you pull it away, it stretches, but the paint doesn't, and so that creates a tear or a jagged edge on the paint, rather than giving you the hard break line that you get with tape. And it almost always screws things up. Now you're like, well, but this is clear coats. Yeah, and you may be right. It might not show up, but you might still get a rough edge that's going to show. And that's just, even with a clear from certain angles, it's just not going to look good. So wouldn't recommend that. The other type of masking fluid is like this. The version of it that I have is this Mr. Hobby, Mr. Masking Sol R, as opposed to the Masking Sol Neo. The Neo is the stretchy stuff. This is more like the old school micro scale, micro mask stuff. It's more of like a kind of a rubbery plastic film, not so much stretchy. And it would probably work better. Still no guarantee. So as a way of getting a gloss, and I guess sort of should have made that point. The reason he was asking is because I've already sprayed a gloss coat on there. So what he wants to do is use liquid mask to mask off the gauge faces before hitting it with a flat coat, so that then you've got the glossy finish on the gauge faces. And it might work. I might try it. There's several different ways to get the glossy gauge faces, and I'll go through those when I get to that point in the process. But not a bad idea. Okay, so last question is, I've got a guy who sprayed some flat over some of his decals, but they didn't blend in very well, and he wants to know if he can spray a gloss over those and try again. And I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that. For whatever reason, I feel like that flat clears, like Dull Coat, which is a lacquer, are not as thick as glosses. And maybe that's just a perception on my part. It may just come down to how you spray it, because aqua gloss, honestly, is pretty thin, and it goes down in pretty thin layers. So that's probably not a fair characterization of glosses in general. But for whatever reason, I find that blending decals, where I want to build up enough material that I can sand it flush and hide those edges, works better with a utility gloss like aqua gloss. And then once I've done that, I've got that unified surface that I can come back and spray a flattener on top of. So yeah, I don't see any reason why you could not go ahead and do that, and work those decals that way and hopefully get those blended in. So at any rate, I hope that answers up all the questions that have stacked up, and I appreciate these. You guys are asking really good questions that I think answering them here on the videos is a good way for everybody to pick up some knowledge. So and if you disagree with my answers, let me know by all means in the comments. Tell me I'm a dumb shit and I should stop. But at least make your case as to why. So okay, finally, washes. I have been looking forward to this for quite a while, because for me, this is where it starts to really get fun. Everything that I've been doing so far with this kit has been purely technical. It's been really pure craftsmanship, without any real personal expression or artistic touches. Basically, up to now, we're just following the instructions and painting it according to the color callouts. Washes can have a tremendous impact on the finished result, and so depending on how you do it, you can really kind of put your own personal stamp on things. Some people like a really high level of contrast, some people not so much, and washes will definitely help you do that. So we're going to get into that, but first thing is to address how we're going to do the washes. There's a couple of different options. You can do what some people like to call a sludge wash, where basically you put the wash over the entire thing and then just come back with some method of removal and wipe the excess away so that it remains in all of the low spots. Or you can do what people like to call a pin wash, which is much more precise, where you're basically applying the wash only around or in each of the features that you want it to affect. It takes a lot longer, but it also takes a lot less cleanup, and that can have an effect on the overall appearance as well. And that gets into a little bit about the different types of materials you can use. So, what are the options? All right. If you like to do the sludge wash type, you've got water-based clay washes like this stuff from Ultimate Modeling Products. And basically, it's like I said, you put it on the whole thing, use a damp paper towel and wipe off the excess. You've got acrylic washes that you can make or buy. Companies like Vallejo make some ready-made acrylic washes. You can make your own acrylic wash using like a clear acrylic gloss like Future. I think Aqua Gloss would work just as well. People have different recipes for it. They like to call it the magic wash, and it does kind of have some magical properties. But what you do is you mix your clear acrylic varnish with like an ink, like Winsor & Newton Black Indian ink. You can use acrylic paint. Some people like to put some water in there. Some people like to put some, like some acrylic retarder to make it flow better. It's one of those things. You just kind of have to come up with your own recipe. And it has the magical property of kind of making nice shadow, soft shadow transitions. And there are places where that really is a nice look and it works really well. But it is not the same as other washes in that once you apply it, you can't work it or remove the excess. You basically brush it on the entire thing, let it rest and dry, and it is what it is. Because the acrylic varnish is going to start to set up very quickly, and you just don't have the same ability to work it the way that you do with a water-based clay wash, or with the next category, which is generally always my preference, and that is an enamel-based wash, something that uses mineral spirits as its carrier. And I like those a lot because they flow really well, they're easy to remove if you make a mistake or if you've got excess, and there are just so many good colors available. So you can get those you can get them pre-made like these from Ammo. These are really nice. Regardless of how you apply them, these are nice because you don't even have to use any mineral spirits to remove the excess. You can pretty much wipe it off with just a soft cloth or a Q-tip. And they have a bunch of different colors that are designed to be complementary with the colors of the vehicle itself. And we'll get into some of that sort of color theory about the washes here in just a second. You can also get ready-made ones from Tamiya and Mr. Hobby. I prefer the Tamiya ones. They're different from something like the Ammo stuff because these are a little bit more difficult to remove. You definitely need a little bit of mineral spirits to do it. But these are nice because they are super, super dense. I find them to be more dense than the Ammo stuff. And they come in this really handy bottle with the brush in it, so if you're lazy like me, they're super quick and easy to apply. Although the truth is I tend not to use the included brush very often, and you'll see that. So I like these a lot. The disadvantage with the Tamiya washes is they just don't come in a lot of colors. Like I think maybe they have like 6. Your basic black, gray, dark brown, light brown. Now you can mix those colors to get anything in between, but again, you just don't have the flexibility. Now, if you want the most flexibility and the most variety, then the next best thing for a mineral spirits based wash is to whip out your oil paints. And these are fantastic because obviously you've got an infinite variety of colors and you can create whatever opacity you want based on how much mineral spirits you reduce it with. And so you've got tremendous power and flexibility with oils. Now, I will say that if you're going to use oils, that the best thing is to use good quality artist oils. What I have found is that the student grade oils are just not as dense with the pigment. That's part of why they're cheaper, and they tend to break up a little more, and I don't find the quality of the washes to be quite as good. So now let's talk about if we're going to use an enamel wash, what do you use to thin it with if you do use oil paints? A couple of different options. A lot of people like the odorless mineral spirits, like this Winsor & Newton Sands odor. And this is just regular hardware store mineral spirits type stuff that's been refined to remove the sulfur compounds that make it smell. Now, I personally don't mind the smell of hardware store mineral spirits, so more often than not, that's what I'm going to use. I do find that they behave slightly differently. For whatever reason, I find that the mineral spirits that just come in the cheap can flow better. They spread out better. And so I tend to prefer those over the odorless stuff. Now, and that may not be generally true. Other brands besides, the Winsor Newton stuff may behave better. I don't know. But that's kind of my thing with doing enamel washes. Okay, so now we've talked about what kind of materials you can use. I can't cover that without talking about what you're going to put the wash on. But I can see that my battery's about to run down. I got to plug this camera in. At any rate, the thing with the surface is you can put a wash on any type of surface, but it just really depends on what effect you want as to what choice you make, all right? There are people who say, oh, you can never put washes on matte paint. And that's just wrong, because you can do it all day long, and but it is going to produce a different result. A matte paint is more like a sponge. It's got those microscopic little pores that we like to talk about, and it will sort of soak up a wash of any kind and grab it more tightly than a gloss surface will. So if you kind of like a grimier effect and you don't mind when that wash bleeds out into the paint, especially if it's an enamel spirits based wash, then by all means use matte paint. I do it regularly. People say you can't remove mineral spirits wash from matte paint. That's not true either. You can. It's slightly more difficult, but I haven't found it to be objectionably hard to where I would think, oh, I just should never do this. But because of the way that the paint sort of soaks up the wash, you're still going to get a little bit of discoloration. You're still going to get a little bit of a stain. You're still going to have a little bit of a grimy effect and a softer transition. So you just have to take that into account. I definitely wouldn't really recommend using a flat paint with a clay-based wash unless you really are after that grimy look, because it is definitely going to soak in there and it is going to be much harder to create the separation by removing the excess. So you have to make that choice. Now, where I'm at right now with this kit is in the cockpit, and in a cockpit I want a relatively high level of contrast, and especially since I'm going to have the canopy closed, because I want it to read a little bit more dramatically since it's so small and so hard to see in there and it's relatively shadowed. So when I want nice tight washes where I get a pretty opaque transition between the surfaces that are separated by the wash, I want to put that wash on a gloss surface because I want it to flow in there in a nice little, thin, dark line and not bleed out into the surrounding paint. So I want a glossier surface, and I already have that because I've used MRP. And that's one of the things that I love about working with MRP is that as a lacquer, it's natural surface finish, is a kind of a semi-gloss. And you'll find that that's true with, like Mr. Color lacquers as well. So I've already got that. And then, of course, I also have a utility gloss on some parts of that cockpit because of the aqua gloss that I applied on top of those decals. So I'm covered either way. Now, if you're using flat paint, and I should point out that everything that I've been doing so far is kind of centered around the fact that I use MRP because it's my favorite stuff. But everything that I've done up to this point, you could have done in exactly the same way with pretty much any other type of paint except for enamels. And I think I've explained enough of that as to why. You could have done everything I've done with enamels, but you would need that acrylic clear gloss layer, a barrier layer on top of it before you come back with an enamel wash. But if you've been using all acrylics, and I mean, whether you were using what I call a normal water-based emulsion acrylic, like Vallejo or Ammo or AK, Mission models, you could have done everything that I've done in exactly the same way using those materials. And you can run washes directly on all of those paints. Some of those also will finish with a sort of a satin or a semi-gloss sheen that works pretty well with washes. So really no need to have changed anything depending on for a different type of paint, because I know that a lot of you guys don't like the smell of lacquers, or for whatever reason just would prefer to use acrylics. So just want to make that clear. Could have done everything I've done exactly the same way using acrylics. So anyhow, with all that said, I feel like I've just been really running my mouth a lot here, and what we really need to do is get into actually doing the washes. So let's get to it. Okay, here we go. Time to actually do some washes. Now, when I'm doing this, I really try first with any stylistic choice to decide what my goal is. What is it that I want to accomplish? And in this case, I have basically two different things. One is, the most fundamental thing with any wash is to create a level of contrast that causes details to pop out by emphasizing color separations and surface breaks. So for example, I want to emphasize the fact that there are ribs on that cockpit wall. I mean, you can see with that side light that there's a shadow there that's natural, but it's just not enough contrast, and it's not going to be there once the cockpit's closed up and the canopy's on and there's not a lot of light in there. So what I'm doing is kind of a little bit of stage makeup. I'm creating a little bit more drama for the sake of visual interest from any angle. And I can do that by using any contrasting color. But what I typically will choose to use is a darker version of the base color. So for example, dark green might work really nice for that, but not so much over here on the silver. And I'd kind of like to keep it simple. In some cases, I might use a dark green on this part and a dark gray on this part. But I don't really feel like I need to go to all that trouble. And part of that is just from experience and knowing kind of what I like the look of. And so what I'm going to use instead for all of that is a dark brown. And there's also a little bit of laziness in there because it's right here handy in this one bottle, and I know that it's going to look pretty good. But you may not like that, okay? You may prefer the look of a really hard wash or a really hard level of contrast. You might want to use just pure black for everything. But I reserve pure black for the other reason that I'm doing washes here. And that is to tell a little story or call out the fact that certain things in here are mechanical. They actually have separated moving parts. And I like to use hard black for that because it's just, again, it's just a subtle thing. And it doesn't really come into play as much here as it does on external surfaces where you've got removable hatches and covers and moving surfaces like ailerons and things like that. But it does, happen to a certain extent with things like this thing right here, okay? Those are all separate moving parts. And yeah, I can see I made a mistake that I didn't get made aware of until just recently. I painted those straps silver like everything else, which was kind of dumb because, no, it was totally dumb because they are actually supposed to be khaki, and that's called out in the instructions, and I just missed it, so I'll take care of that later on off screen. But at any rate, those cylinders, the rudder pedals themselves, that's all separate. That's all moving mechanical parts. Same thing like around the perimeter of the door and underneath the crowbar, which isn't supposed to be there. So that'll be a little bit of a hassle because I got to use two different colors there, in tight proximity, but it's really not too big of a deal. So let's just get right into it. Now, the other thing that I may want to do is, tell a little bit of a story of dirt. And so let's just pick some low-hanging fruit first. This thing right here is obviously way down in the bottom of the cockpit, and it's going to collect dirt, and it's not going to get cleaned. So I'm not really going to feel very compelled to remove any excess washes. I'm going to be happy to let it just be kind of gross, probably. I don't know. We'll see how it looks when it dries. That's pretty heavy. But you can see that, when I wipe it all over the place, it's definitely gonna create a more grimy effect because of where it chooses to collect. Now, what I'm hoping is that those three ejector pin marks are not going to be visible in the finished product, because if they are, I'll have to come back and fix those. But I won't really know that until I do a full-on assembly, until I dry fit the wing to the fuselage. That's what that thing is called, the fuselage. And it won't be a big deal to fix if I have to. Some of you guys who have already built this may chime in on the comments and tell me that, yeah, I probably should just go ahead and do that. But I just don't feel like screwing with it right now, so we'll see what happens. At any rate, I'm not going to increase the probability of them showing by flowing some wash into it. So we're just going to let that dry and see how it looks. I may decide that I don't want it to be quite that filthy looking. We'll see. I'm just going to let it dry. Now, one thing that I just had a part fall off of that sprue. I better collect that up really quick. Okay, now one thing that you probably noticed is that when I pulled the brush out of that bottle of dark brown panaline accent, that it had a lot of pigment in it. And this is a thing with these washes, and really any mineral spirits wash. It tends to settle, and when your brush has been sitting in there for a long time, it's going to do that. It also is the same reason why you have to sort of continually keep this stuff mixed up and shaken well, so that pigment is always suspended in there. It's just a thing with enamel panaline washes that you can't really get around. Okay, now since we're doing that, and I'm using the brush that's in the container, and I'm going to switch from that here in a minute. If you know that brush is going to come out there overloaded with pigment, then the thing to do is just clean some of that wash off first before you apply it. Okay, now since I was talking about these just having a black wash on them, I'll go ahead and do that. And you can see how it just immediately starts bringing things to life by emphasizing those details. And this is going to be another part where I'm not going to feel the need to go back and remove any excess. I'm going to just put it on here and let it do its thing and call it good. So that's pretty simple. That's taken care of. Looks good. All right. Same sort of thing going on here with this control column. We have a bunch of separate parts there. So using the black. Now, this is a case where I might want to remove the excess, or I might not. You know, by allowing the wash to cover everything, which you really can't help on a part this small, you're adjusting the tonal value of the base color, and that's not a bad thing. It's good to create a little bit of that kind of variety. Again, it's, you know, that's just a stylistic choice that you kind of make on the fly, depending on what you think of the way it looks. But right now, that looks pretty good. Now, one of the frustrating things about washes, and this is something that I just never get over, is that they look great when you first apply them, right? When they're wet and they're flowing, they just look fantastic. But what happens, and we'll see this as they start to dry, is that they lose some of their density and some of those magical properties. And we'll see that here directly when these do start to dry. Now, I've gone ahead and just slobbered it all over this part where I need it, but I am going to go back and remove the excess on this because I want good definition around those straps. So we'll come back to that. All right, this little thing right here, pretty simple and easy. Not really going to need to worry about any excess because the tank is black. But this is a good example of how a wash helps you tighten up your color separations. This was not perfect after detail painting, but it looks a bit crisper now. Okay, so I think this is getting pretty close to taking care of all the stuff where I want to use black. I like it here because that adjuster mechanism is separate, but you know, that's not really going to show. So that's probably being a little bit finicky there. Okay, I want a little bit of black on around this door, like I mentioned before. Now, okay, now we're going to get to where I'm going to switch applicators because one of the issues with washes that I've mentioned several times is how you clean up the excess. And my favorite way of cleaning up the excess is not have to do it at all. But that means that you've got to be more precise with your application because there's always going to be, you know, places where you've got, you know, where you're coloring outside the lines. Now, you can hear one of my cats in the background. She apparently disagrees with everything I'm saying. Anyway, this is my favorite tool for precision pen washing. This is the Lowe & Cornell No. 2 Ultra Round, and you can see why I like it, because it is super sharp. And you'll see it's, you know, it's a little fuzzy right now because it's dry, but once I get it in this wash, you'll see that it immediately will create a nice tight point. And it also, because it's such a long bristled brush, the belly of it holds a lot of wash. So that makes it possible to be pretty controlled in your application and to just target the exact place that you need it to go. Still, I'm not doing great. I'm also not wearing an optivisor, so not the best strategy for precision work, but we'll see how it goes. So all of these parts around this door I pretty much want to call out with a good hard black. It's not working as well down here at the bottom because there's not really a good groove there. So I'm definitely going to come back and tune that up a bit, but you can see what I mean. That black creates a really high level of contrast, and for me, that's just more than I want as an overall look for things. It's just, I don't know, it's heavy, and that's just not what I really want. Okay, again, this is getting pretty picky and pretty subtle because it's not going to show, but the underside of the lid for this little box, that's a place where I'll use black. And part of the reason why I'm doing that kind of thing, even on places where it's not going to show, is really just more as a discussion of my thinking and my approach to doing washes and why I make the choices that I do. Because those are choices that apply to pretty much any situation on any kind of model. This is the same way that I think about it regardless. Okay, I've got these parts in here that definitely have color separations, and hopefully my light bulbs will look a little bit better after I do this. That may be a little bit dark, we'll see. If it's too dark, then that's where you come back and tune it up by removing some of it. And it's just another reason why enamel washes are so great. Now, I think I screwed up on this instrument panel. I think I really should have used a lighter gray because there's just not going to be a lot of value in doing this black wash. But I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway, and we'll see how it shakes out. May be surprised. Black on black is always challenging. Okay, so I think that covers all of that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the black that's in the brush just by blotting it on a paper towel, and that'll get rid of enough of it. And I'm going to shake up this brown again Because you know, if it sits there for 5 minutes, that's enough for it to settle out and not work as well. Okay, so now for stuff like this tub, I want to use the brown, but I don't want to have to come back and do a lot of cleanup. So again, just going to work the surfaces and try to be precise. Okay, so that's the basic application of the wash. Now it's time to tune it up a little bit. And you probably notice that that's, you know, pretty slow and a little bit tedious. And you may say, you know what, I don't really want to spend all that time. I feel like it looks just as good if I just slather it all over like I've done here and, you know, wipe off the excess and go on about my business. And that's totally cool because, again, it depends on the look you're trying to achieve. So let's take a look at this part right here. This is where I started. Now, you can see how the wash has flowed in there and naturally created a very interesting type of diffusion. I mean, those are tide marks, basically. And it's interesting and authentic, and I kind of like it. But maybe it's a little bit more than you want. So let's take this as an opportunity to do a little bit of wash removal. And I keep knocking parts off of this sprue. That is one of the disadvantages of leaving parts on the sprue forever. And I could probably solve that by just taking this wing section off of here. But anyway, so when it comes time to remove excess wash, I'm going to just use regular old mineral spirits from the hardware store. And what I'm going to do is just dip a Q-tip very lightly in the mineral spirits. But the next thing is what I find is most important. I'm going to dab the excess panel line wash, mineral spirits off on a paper towel, because it's what I was talking about before. What you really want is just a bare whiff of mineral spirits in there, because that's really all it takes. And you can see that when it comes time to do that, you just want to be able to barely brush across those high spots and really control where you're removing the excess. So you've got to have a light touch. All right, but you can see what I mean, okay? Sorry I keep bumping the camera, but I've just barely removed any of that, and I've been able to limit that to just those high spots. All right, so I think that works pretty good. It'll create a totally different look if I go and start scrubbing on it everywhere. And this is also a good illustration of why I do the application the way that I do, because I want it to be fairly clean and tight. And you can see the more you've got on there, the more you start smearing it around when it comes time to remove it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but again, it creates a different look, because now it's just grimier and more stained. And again, not a bad thing necessarily. It just all depends on what you want. And what I'll sometimes do is, while that's still a little bit open, I'll just take and rub on it with my finger, because that also works as a pretty good sort of selective removal tool. So you can see what the end result is with that part right there. Pretty filthy looking. You know, I've got a lot of grime collected down there. And again, I kind of like that. I kind of like that look for that thing because it's the, you know, it's the very, very bottom of the fuselage interior where there's going to be a lot of dirt collecting. Okay, but I kind of wanted to clean up around the edges of it a little bit, so I've gone and got myself another Q-tip, and I've allowed a little more mineral spirits in there, and I'm just working that around the edges of that. And this is what you get into when you're doing oil paint rendering, because that's really what this is. It's just that it's really, really thin oil paint, so to speak. Because again, as I've said before, enamels and oils are, for all practical purposes, essentially the same thing. So this is just one form of oil paint rendering, and what you find is that you just have to work it. You could even see while I was applying some of the washes that in areas where it wasn't really flowing the way that I wanted it to, that I had to coax it a little bit, and that's just normal. But there we go. So I'm going to just leave that the way it is and let it cook off over there for a little bit. And let's see what I want to do with some of these other parts. Now, it's also a good idea to keep several Q-tips handy because as soon as they get loaded up, that's when things start to get muddy, and I don't want that. I want it to be pretty clean and tight. So let me see now what I can do with this little thing where I really do want it to be nice and tight around those straps. So I've got a new Q-tip, and it's got barely any mineral spirits in it. And I'm going to see if I can get this to do what I want. If I don't, it's not a big deal because, again, the beauty of working with mineral-based, blah, obviously can't do this and talk at the same time. The beauty of working with mineral spirits based materials is that I can always just erase everything if I don't like it and come back and fix it. Okay, so it's next day and the washes are all done, and I think I'm pretty happy with where everything is, so we'll just do a quick run through so you can see where it's at. You'll also notice that I have gone ahead and added a few parts, like that throttle quadrant thing right there is in there now. And the reason that I had not added that before was because I wanted to make sure that nothing was in my way while I was working on the washes. And just, you know, to make sure to keep everything separate. Got the trim wheel in there now as well. And you can see how the wash tightened up my sloppy work on the throttle quadrant. So that's a good thing. So just running through all these. There's the former that goes at the back of the cockpit. This is the cockpit tub, obviously. And you can really see now how much the wash makes this stuff come to life, because like those holes that are molded in that rib and that, you know, the bolts around that cap thing, you know, now have some relief, so they show up a lot better. Little oxygen tank is nice and tight. looks pretty good. I went ahead and corrected the color of the foot straps on the rudder pedals, and that looks pretty nice, I think. The control column, just went with the straight black wash on that. I think I showed that before. So that's got some nice relief. My air tanks, I'm finally happy. I did several corrections to get that little strap to where I was satisfied with it. But you can see where I'm paying for the mistakes that I made right at the beginning, because I've got that roughness in the surface there right above the strap, and I'm really bummed out about that. You know, the good news is that it only shows at this level of magnification, but still, you know, that's a fail on my part. I just didn't do a good job to begin with, had to correct it, and, you know, that's what happens a lot of times when you make mistakes, is it just becomes a cascade of negative effects. Speaking of screwing up, I really biffed on this instrument panel bulkhead. I forgot to clear coat it with all the other parts, and you can see that I washed the colors right off of that little switch thing. It's barely got any silver left on it. There's pretty much no black left on the little dial face, and you can see on the tip of that brass thing. So I'm going to have to correct that, but since I've already got the wash on there, I'm going to just wait until after I've done the ungloss, and then I'll come back and pick up those little touch-ups after I do that. Let's see, the seat was a bit of work, but feel pretty cool about that. One little thing that I did on the seat is I was not satisfied with the density. I mean, I didn't want to use the dark brown there because the cushion is dark brown, but I was not satisfied with the density I was getting from the black wash. So I went to an old trick. Hopefully you can see that I've got a nice black groove in between those cushions, and the way that I did that is this little secret weapon right here. This Micron Pigma ink, archival ink pen. Not the same as a Sharpie. This stuff is great, and this is a super fine little tip. You can see what I mean. So it comes in pretty handy for situations like that because it's small enough to get in there. You can clean up mistakes with a brush that's got a little bit of spit on it, so that won't affect your paint. It's great for getting a really hard, dense black separation. I got a little bit of wash on the gun sight, so that looks pretty squared away. Get it off these tweezers before that tweezer popping thing happens and it goes flying off into Never Never Land. This is the other side of the cockpit, and this is where I feel like you can kind of really see the subtle differences maybe between the black and the brown. You can see on those ribs there, they've got a bit of the brown wash, and then you can see around that emergency landing gear actuator, it's got the black wash. And you can see where the brown really kind of shows there on the silver parts. Maybe it shows better on this side, where you can kind of see the difference there around the access door. So you know, and you can see that the brown wash is not as dense as the black wash, and so it lends a kind of, you know, it lightens it up a little bit, but it also just kind of makes it look a little dirty. And not all of the washes are exactly the same density or width, and part of me doesn't like that, but part of me also does, because again, I feel like it lends a little bit to the sort of authenticity of it, and I kind of like that look. So at a certain point, I stop working on trying to make those washes any denser or tighter. But speaking of, how do I tune those up? Because at this point, I've gone through several rounds of basically applying the wash like I showed, doing the rough cleanup with Q-tips, and what you end up with, or what I end up with anyway, is a whole collection of Q-tips that have varying degrees of crud and mineral spirits in them. And I eventually will end up with some that just barely have a whiff of mineral spirits, and those are some of the best ones for cleaning up excess. You have to scrub a little bit, but you don't have to worry too much about rubbing, about doing any damage, because you're just, again, you have barely any mineral spirits in there, and you shouldn't be doing any damage anyway. But even after several rounds of applying and cleaning and tuning up, even with a pointy Q-tip like that, there are going to be places that you cannot get into if you really want it to be tight. And if you're trying to adjust the width of a line, and sometimes it's you're battling the molding. Like on that rib that's right behind that black gizmo, that just doesn't have a really good hard edge in the molding, and it just didn't want to hold the wash consistently. Same thing back here in the silver area right there, just not a super hard edge, and that can be really frustrating with washes. And there's two things that I do to work that. What I will do is I'll get my brush loaded up with the right density of the wash, and that just takes a little bit of experimenting to get there and figure out what that density is. But that's where this little 3M pad that I was talking about before really comes in handy, because you can just kind of take some out of the bottle and mix it up right there on the pad, and I'll tell you about the gray thing here in a minute, and then just kind of work with it. So once I've got the density where I want it, then what you do is you just take the tip of the brush, and I can't really illustrate this effectively, but, well, maybe I can if I've got some wash out of here. So you get a little bit in the brush, and again, it's a matter of getting the right density, and I'll have to experiment a little bit here. Okay, so it's flowing pretty well there, but if it doesn't want to hold the edge, what I do is I just kind of actually work on painting it in there by just going along and dot, 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 and I can really fill up even a relatively shallow relief like I've got there on that stringer that's molded into the side of the cockpit there below the that black box. But obviously you can see that now it's got a little bit of an uneven edge to it. So what to do about that? All right, that's the next wash trick. So let me clean this brush real quick. And this is where just I have a jar of just plain old hardware store mineral spirits right here that I use during this process, and I go back to this itty bitty 3/0 Series 7 miniature brush. This is a power tool for cleaning up washes, because what I'll do is I'll just dip it in the mineral spirits a little bit, and you don't need a lot. You can even wick most of it off using the using a paper towel or whatever. So what I do then is I take the brush And this is Optivisor type work. I'm going to try and demonstrate it here with just my glasses on. Probably not do a good job, but just come along and work next to the panel line. Whoops, losing a hair out of the sun brush there. Didn't want to go away. Anyway, basically you're just going to use the mineral spirits and just cut in along that line until you pull it back to the width that you want, and you clean it up to a relatively tight shadow there. And look, that can get pretty tedious, but if that's the look you're after, that's the work you got to do. So whether you're trying to really tune it up to try and create an even shadow, or you're just trying to reach in around some little bit of mechanism that like next to that brass looking thing there, can't get in there with a Q-tip. So using this little brush like this with that little bit of mineral spirits just gives you tons of control. But one thing you have to consistently do, and sometimes I'll just wipe it off on my finger. You can see a little bit of the color still, maybe not, but I can see it with my glasses. A little bit of the color still came off, even though it doesn't look like much. That's kind of the thing you have to keep doing, is cleaning that off and getting the color that you've just lifted off out of the bristles. Otherwise, all you're doing is just pushing it around, and you'll never really get a tight look there. So anyway, that's just a little bit about cleanup. Now, before I forget, I mentioned that I fixed the foot straps on the rudder pedals, but I forgot to say what I used, and that was just a quick hit with a little bit of this Mission, whatever it is, Russian 6K brown stuff. Looked pretty good to me. Now, why did I have some gray panel line wash mixed up here on this little pad? I decided to try a little experiment. I wasn't super happy, I think I mentioned, with the tonality of the instrument panel, and I wanted to create a little bit more separation between the gauges and the panel itself. So I think you can see what I've done there. I just went and very carefully flowed in a little bit of that gray panel line wash, mixed it with a little bit of thinner, a little bit of black to kind of get where I wanted, and you can see that just kind of lightens it up a little bit and creates a little bit of relief. Again, probably ridiculous, given that that's just going to not be visible, but I ended up liking the look of it, and sometimes, that this is how we learn. Just try these little experiments, because the truth is, if I didn't like it, I could just scrub it all off of there with a Q-tip that's got mineral spirits on it. No big deal. So, I think I'm pretty happy with where all these parts are at with their washes, and it's time to move on to the next step, which will be unglossing everything so that we can add the next layer of colors. Okay, so there we go. That's that. Hopefully when I edit that, it won't be too ridiculously long. But, that's washes, at least for me. Some people may, think, oh, that's way too much, and they want their washes to be just a really quick and easy thing. And that's totally cool. It just depends on what you're after. I spent an absurdly large amount of time doing mine and tuning them up. I think I probably spent like 4 hours total doing all of what you saw there on camera by the time I was happy with it. So, it is what it is. But speaking of tuning things up, one little trick that I forgot to mention with this little bitty brush, sometimes you can tune the wash up on the fly. Let's say that you've just applied the wash and it's still liquid, and it's kind of in a tight little area, and you can see that you've got more in there than you want. What you can do is take the brush and just very carefully bring the tip of it into the wash puddle, and it will suck a lot of it up right out of there into the bristles of the brush. And you can do that however many times it takes until you're left with exactly as much wash as you need. So anyway, it's oil paint basically, and it's just a matter of just working it and until you get the feel for it. It's sensitive to the material and to your technique and your tools. So, it is what it is. You just got to work it until you're happy. And hopefully you guys are happy with this segment of the project. At any rate, as always, I appreciate you watching. Much love.